Very controversial races in F1 history. There are many, right? And today I picked 10 for us to discuss. Kidnapping of a 5-time champion, a championship decision that ended in a crash. We have more than one driver disqualified and the crowd roaring, chanting his name back. Anyway, you've already seen some examples here. That's it, races with confusion. And that ended in discussions, which we will talk about today on Splash and Go. Let's go. Many of these here, you are surely already guessing which ones will come to our bar table. In that discussion, whose fault it was, who started, who finished, who was right, who was wrong. But I made sure to pick some here that will surprise you. Not because they didn't cause discussion, yes, they are controversial races, but because time has left the controversy in oblivion. And the first of them, imagine if nowadays Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, or Fernando Alonso were kidnapped on the eve of an important race and didn't show up in time for the start. Yes, that's what happened at the Grand Prix. Havana City in 1958 in Cuba. It was the second edition of the race that had already been successful in 57. The government's idea was to promote a modern country open to tourism and also to explain to the world and the international press that everything was living in the utmost normality. But that was precisely the issue. Cuba was not experiencing a situation of normality because in the Sierra Maestra, in the interior of the country, a guerrilla movement led by Fidel Castro and with famous names like Ernesto Che Guevara was nipping at the heels of the regime of President Fulgencio Batista, who was aligned from the start with the United States government. The revolution was slowly gaining supporters in the interior of the country and was growing towards the capital, Havana. The race in 57 proceeded normally, but Castro's movement was then thinking of giving international projection to their cause by kidnapping a Formula One driver, in this case, the most important one at the time, Juan Manuel Fangio, and they succeeded. Fangio was captured on the eve of the race, Saturday night. It was February 23rd, 1958, and a car with kidnappers pulled up at the door of the Lincoln Hotel just as Fangio was returning from dinner. They politely introduced themselves, showed a pistol inside their jacket, and advised the 5-time champion. The maestro was about to get into the car, but before that they asked him, "Where is Sterling Moss?" Fangio then negotiated with his captors, who ended up not taking Moss because he said, "He's on his honeymoon, a young man, newly married, just take me." The topic quickly made international news. But young one, understand that quickly is not the same. Half an hour after someone does something in Europe, the whole world already knows. It was on the morning Sunday that the news agencies began to report that a 5-time champion was missing. The Batista regime then searched for Fangio, but he was not found. And the race start was delayed by an hour in hopes that he might be located, but he wasn't. The race was won by Sterling Moss driving a Ferrari, and on that Sunday night after the race, Fangio was returned to the door of the Argentine embassy there in Havana. I tell this story in my book, and I'll even leave the link for you below. In the description, you can buy it from Gulliver Publishing, and there I provide more details. But the most interesting thing is that Fangio exchanged correspondence with his kidnappers for his entire life and said, "During the interrogation, the police showed me photos of suspects and I heard 2 of the kidnappers there, but I stayed quiet and said I didn't know anyone." And this was a race that had a lot of controversy for reasons off the track, but it did. The 1982 San Marino Grand Prix can be considered the culmination of a war between the FIA and FOCA, the Organization of English Constructors for Power in Formula One. Bernie Ecclestone had been orchestrating this alliance, the FOCA Formula One Constructors Association, which would unite the interests of the English constructors to challenge the FIA, and the privileges it granted, and indeed it did, to the teams from continental Europe, Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, Renault, Legia, etc. The English rightly argued, "We make up the majority of the grid. Why do we receive less to race than these guys? If we don't go, there is no race." On the other side, the FIA threatened with its big stick, regulating the sport, punishing, disqualifying, etc. It was then in protest of an inconsistency in the decisions made by the federation which disqualified one and not others. In a race that took place here in Jacarepaguá, the English constructors then decided, we are not going to race in Imola. Upon arriving there, only the teams from continental Europe were present, so 14 cars and a few English stragglers who desperately needed money. With the grid thinned out, Ferrari instructed its two drivers, Gilles Villeneuve and Didier Pironi, to put on a show. We need to show that Formula One can survive without the English. And so they raced at Ferrari's home, they donned their outfits and went to battle. The two Ferraris swapped positions several times, but the agreement was that Villeneuve should win in the end. Pironi took Gilles' position on the last lap, but Villeneuve thought, the order is for him to give it back to me. I'll go for it and overtake again. But then Pironi played hard and didn't allow it. Tensions rose, the Frenchman beat the Canadian, and after the checkered flag, Gilles said, I will never speak to that guy again. A promise he would be able to keep because he would lose his life in Zolder 2 races later, and Pironi wouldn't die, but he would also have a tragic accident in Hockenheim, losing his life years later in a boating accident at sea. The 1976 British Grand Prix had the crowd roaring, demanding the race officials to bring James Hunt back into the competition. Tens of thousands of fans shouted, we want Hunt! We want Hunt! It was that championship where he fought with McLaren against Nick Lauda with Ferrari. At the start, Hunt gets off poorly, loses position to Lauda, who is hit by Clay Regazzoni and has a broken wheel. Other cars, including Hunt and Jacques Lafitte, are damaged, so the red flag is given due to debris accumulation on the track. The teams of Hunt, Regazzoni, and Lafitte, McLaren, Ferrari, and Didier then start preparing reserve cars, thinking there wouldn't be enough time to repair the originals. However, the stewards then make a decision and announce, we will not allow reserve cars since you completed a full lap to bring the car back to the pits with the originals, in this case, the main cars. It caused a huge discussion, it created quite a commotion, and meanwhile this was happening and the start, or in this case, the restart, was delayed. McLaren managed to fix the original car, and then Hunt was no longer out of the race or disqualified because he had the original car to restart. Meanwhile, in the stands, tens of thousands, maybe more than 100,000 fans were chanting in unison, we want Hunt, which intimidated the officials. Brands, Hatch is a peak cauldron, and the stands created that Libertadores atmosphere. The officials then allowed the three, Hunt, Regazzon, and Lafitte, to restart, with the teams knowing there was a possibility of a later disqualification. Lauda, after the restart, led most of the race, but transmission problems caused him to yield the lead to Hunt. He crossed the finish line first with his opponent in second, but Hunt was disqualified. Victory then went to Nick Lauda with George Scheckter in second, and Hunt, along with Regazzoni and Lafitte, disqualified. It caused quite a stir, obviously, because the championship was at stake. The 1975 Spanish Grand Prix is remembered for being a race where people died, and it cannot be said that the drivers hadn't already warned about it. The event took place in Barcelona at Montjuic Park, a very beautiful place considered by many even the most beautiful that has ever hosted a Formula One race. Imagine a track running through gardens, trees, a park flanked by a beautiful city with the sea in the background. And the track was fast. However, upon arriving there, the Formula One personnel with Emerson Fittipaldi at the forefront warned, the track is not safe. Wobbly guardrails, collapsing barriers, poles within escape areas. A horror. As the organizer promised and did nothing, the teams themselves at a certain point rolled up their sleeves and took action. With their tools, they fixed the barriers, threatening not to race. But then the Spanish dictator Franco, with his police, warned the teams, all your equipment is inside the Olympic Stadium, within the park. I will seal the stadium and seize the cargo. And then the Formula One teams are convinced to race. The race started. And it didn't take long until the 29th lap. Rolf Stommelen loses a wing and crashes into the crowd, killing 5 people. The race is stopped on the 29th lap before halfway, and the points therefore are halved. Victory for Jochen Mass, with Lella Lombardi scoring for the only time for a woman in Formula One. Because of this, with 6th place, earning only half a point. The 2002 Austrian Grand Prix became known for Kleber Machado and the... Not today, yes. It's hard to believe it's already been 23 years since this happened. Rubens Barrichello, racing for Ferrari, was a teammate of Michael Schumacher. Ferrari had a much superior car. Schumacher had already won in 2000 and 2001 and was clearly the first driver of that team. However, on certain weekends, during the 6 years they were teammates, Barrichello did, indeed, perform better than Schumacher. And this in Austria 2002 was one of those times. He was faster on Friday, faster on Saturday, and on Sunday he was leading the race with the German in second. In the pits, the question arose, would he be forced to give up his position? Barrichello himself recounts that the previous year in the same race for a second and third place, he was forced to swap positions and was assured that if it were for the victory, that would not happen. Well, irony of ironies, a year later, Ferrari was tested and failed because for the victory, they ordered a swap. It is considered one of the biggest embarrassments in the history of Formula One, and many people debate, should he have given way? Should he not have given way? Did Ferrari make a mistake? Did Ferrari not make a mistake? After all, they were leading the championship with some margin. And it wasn't because of this victory that could have been a second place that Schumacher won the title at the end of the year. But also in another race, it was impossible to know at that point. In any case, it sparked and continues to spark debate. Perhaps realizing the magnitude of what was happening and having crossed the finish line first, Schumacher even celebrated. But when he got out of the car and realized the boos he was receiving from the fans, something rather unusual in Formula One and more associated with stadiums, he then ended up changing his stance, putting Barrichello in first place on the podium. And Ferrari would be fined just for that. For breaking the podium ceremony, because you can't put the first in second and the second in first. After that, temporarily, the FIA banned team orders. But it's impossible to prevent this kind of thing. What followed, follows, and will continue to happen. The 1997 European Grand Prix was another Formula One championship decision that ended in controversy and contact. Jacques Villeneuve from Williams and Michael Schumacher from Ferrari competed until the last race in Jerez de la Frontera, Spain. Upon arriving there, Schumacher was leading and Villeneuve was closing the gap. And when he tries to make the pass, the German, who had done something similar in '94 against Damon Hill, also from Williams, throws the car up. Villeneuve is lucky not to suffer damage. Schumacher is out, but the evidence was clear. It's clear that he tried, and this time he tried and failed. Villeneuve then champion. It caused a huge uproar. Schumacher ended up being disqualified from the championship, losing all his points. He was not the runner-up in '97. You can look it up in the history books. No one reads history books these days. You can look it up on Wikipedia. The runner-up of 1997 is Heinz-Harald Frentzen with the other Williams. Many people cite this incident as definitive proof that Schumacher was a driver of bad character, forgetting that drivers are competitive animals, very competitive, and that criticizing those who use aggressive tactics to win championships can be like spitting upwards and having it land on your forehead or on the next topic. The 2005 United States Grand Prix is possibly the weirdest race in Formula One history, with 6 cars on the grid. The younger ones might not know, but the old-timers will remember. There was a day when the war of egos and commercial interests in Formula One brought the category to ridicule. The category would race in the United States inside the Indianapolis circuit, not the oval, but a mixed circuit built inside. It was working out, and slowly the Americans were starting to understand that business. But then, since Friday, the tires from the French manufacturer Michelin began to show damage. Some, in fact, with catastrophic damage causing accidents, as happened with Ralf Schumacher. Upon analyzing the compounds, and I explain this in more detail in the video about the fiascos in Formula One history, which I recommend you watch, Michelin realized there would be no solution. They went to the FIA and begged, for God's sake, let's alter the circuit. Let's put in a chicane. The FIA said, tough luck, the track is homologated this way. I won't make last-minute changes. Bridgestone, manufacturing tires for Ferrari, Minardi, and Jordan, says, my tires are fine, we want to race. And Ferrari, thinking this might be the only chance to win a race in 2005, says, let's race. Until the last minutes before the start, the stick pulling and happening, and even ridiculous solutions like an exclusive lane with reduced speed inside just for the cars. With Michelin, it was even considered to see the level to which things went. There was no consensus, and then to fulfill the contract, the drivers using Michelin tires, meaning all but 3 teams on that grid, are instructed to form the grid, given the green signal, proceed for the formation lap, and then return to the pits, not going for the start. The world of Formula One then held its breath. Would this really happen? And when Kimi Raikkonen and the others started heading into the grid, the farce was set. A Grand Prix in the United States in front of a crowd already suspicious of that peculiar category would then have 6 cars on the grid. The trauma ended up delaying the popularization of Formula One in the United States for another decade. It would only really catch on there after the creation of the Austin circuit in 2012, and this is remembered by many as one of the biggest fiascos in the history of Formula One, and one of the greatest controversies in which the entire category was jointly involved. The 1989 Japanese Grand Prix was the second chapter of the immense duel between Senna and Prost, because the first had been in '88, won by Senna. In '89, the Brazilian was at a disadvantage in the standings, and that year, at that point, they were no longer speaking to each other. The feud had started in Imola, as you might know, with Senna braking without informing the Frenchman, an agreement not to overtake on the first lap, and so on. Prost then began to accuse Senna of being a traitor, someone who couldn't be trusted, and the atmosphere within McLaren started to deteriorate. When they arrived at Suzuka, Senna, who had had a much less consistent year than Prost, needed 2 victories. He needed to win in Japan and then needed to win in Australia. Prost knew this. He set up his car for race conditions and knew that at the very least he would finish in second place, since McLaren was far superior to the rest. At the start, he got off better. Since Suzuka had that thing of starting from the inside, he took the lead and, with the car better set up for the race, led. Senna chased the Frenchman the entire race. The 2 running, separated by just a few meters, each waiting for the other to make a mistake. And no one made a mistake. As the race was nearing its end, Senna became impatient and realized that the only possible overtaking point was in the tightest spot. In that chicane, which would become, as we know for good reasons, the chicane of discord. For many years, I thought that Prost hadn't done anything wrong since he was in front, until I saw an image that we will try to show here. If copyright allows, taken from the front by an amateur cameraman, it shows Prost turning sharply and earlier than necessary to block Senna. The 2 collide very slowly, like in a shopping mall parking lot. The Frenchman gets out, Senna stays in the car waiting to be pushed. We know the rest, it's history. The marshals give the car a push, Senna returns to a section ahead of the collision point and in theory cut the track. But after the time he was stopped, of course, he gained no advantage with that. He goes to the pits, changes the car's nose, catches up to Nannini's Benetton, overtakes at the same spot and wins the race. But he would be disqualified, and this decision still sparks debate to this day, and it would cause even more controversy a year later. Fate whimsically placed Senna and Prost once again, fighting for a title once again in Suzuka. And once again, it would be a collision. It would decide the championship. This time, they were in separate teams. Senna, once again on pole, once again on the inside, once again on the dirtiest part of the track. Prost in a Ferrari, this time he was behind in the championship, needing the result. And the one who now had the advantage of crashing, nobody scored, I'm the champion, was Senna. And the result, as Murray Walker would say in the commentary, was absolutely predictable. Senna didn't make the turn, didn't slow down, hit the Frenchman in the middle, end of the race for both. And then it was no use disqualifying Senna. After all, Prost was out. Initially, he got out of the car saying, yes, it was an accident, I tried. He closed the gap, we crashed. Later, he would confess in the '91 title that it was all indeed on purpose. And I always recount the story here of Steve Nicholas, who had worked at McLaren for many years and was at that time with Ferrari but had friends in Senna's team. And they told him, the engine telemetry showed that he only took his foot off the accelerator 100 meters into the barriers when the car stopped. And yes, it caused and still causes a lot of controversy, a lot of fuss, a lot of discussion. There are those who argue that Senna did it to cleanse his soul, possibly, almost, with blood. There are others who think it's an exaggeration. One mistake does not justify another. And even if it justified an accident at 60 km per hour, it cannot be paid with an accident at 280. And of course, we will have differing opinions in the comment section about this, as with all the others, as with the one that is still missing. Lastly, on our list, evidently, the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the most controversial Formula One championship decision, possibly, in all sports. I can't think of anything more confusing than talking about this race. We were living in a championship of intense rivalry. Two great drivers, two great teams behind them. Lewis Hamilton from Mercedes, Max Verstappen from Red Bull, an already established 7-time champion who had won everything there was to win. And the other, a young man who had not yet won anything, the edge of a car from a team that in the past had already taken everything. Hamilton had been the stone, now he was the glass. Verstappen, for the first time with the chance to win, it was even said that he played hard sometimes and counted on Hamilton backing down. The championship was filled with controversial moments. The crash at Silverstone, the other crash at Monza, penalties here, penalties there, track limits, and so on. When it reached the final third of the championship, Mercedes seemed to have a better car, and Hamilton, trailing in the standings, was closing the gap. In the race in Abu Dhabi, Hamilton was leading with a significant advantage over Verstappen, who ended up being greatly assisted by his teammate Sergio Perez, who on the track but cost Hamilton several seconds of advantage. Then, at the end of the race, as you know, Nicholas Latifi crashes. With little time left for the race to end, 3-4 laps, it would take time to remove the car. Mercedes then thinks, let's finish under the yellow flag. With that, they don't call Hamilton in. Verstappen pits, comes out with new tires, and the race direction decides to remove only the cars that were between the two, going against the explicit provisions of the regulations. It's not me saying this, it was written in the regulations that all the cars would overtake. With that, the pack is split in half and the green flag is given before the rest of the group reach the back of the pack. In short, a mess. With this, Verstappen, on new tires, goes after Hamilton and has no great difficulty in taking the lead, and with that, securing the victory. The 2021 title in his first championship, and then, chaos ensues. Arguments here, arguments there, many people saying, oh my, but after all, they didn't want Hamilton to win again either. He had been winning for several years, and I've been invited to various podcasts and friends' channels, etc. And I always say, folks, everyone has the right to be a champion, including those who had been champions until then. But Verstappen had never won. I know, but the regulations are meant to regulate the sport, not to correct this kind of unending dominance. As you can see, it gives a lot to talk about. I'm even getting ahead of myself with my opinion here, but what about it? Is this the most controversial championship decision? Because even that can be controversial. Some people might think it was Suzuka 89 or Suzuka 90, or the 6-car race, or Riquelme having to give up position. After all, what is controversial for me might not be controversial for you. So, comment section, feel free. This was then another episode of Splash and Go on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, it's free. It costs nothing to show it. It really helps the channel. Do us this favor in 2025. Also, leave your hype with us to show the algorithm that you like our work, like this channel, like our videos. And we keep growing and spreading our work. Internet out there, all right? To receive notifications for each of our videos, Telegram channels, WhatsApp, and the Instagram broadcast channel are up and running. Links down here in the description. And to not miss anything on our social networks, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, TikTok, and even my personal channel, Rodrigo_Splash and Go. The handles are being shown here. Links down below in the description. There's content all the time. Okay, so that's it. Thanks, and a big hug.